Hey guys, it's Daniel. Kirk grew up a fan of Led Zeppelin, as did the band's future drummer, Dave Grohl, who appears in many Nirvana photos wearing a hat with John Bonham's symbol on it, John Bonham having been a big influence of Dave's. As a matter of fact, Dave Grohl has a variation of John Bonham's symbol tattooed on his right forearm and left shoulder. In 2008, Zeppelin's Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones joined the Foo Fighters on stage during a concert at Wembley Stadium in London, where they performed Zeppelin classics Rock and Roll and Ramble On. In terms of how Dave Grohl's connection to Zeppelin began, he recalled the following in 2020, quote, "It's almost as if I had fallen into a Led Zeppelin movie or something. It didn't even feel real. It all started at the Live Earth benefit that we played in, I think, '06 or '07. It was in multiple cities around the world, but we were invited to play at the London gig, which was at Wembley Stadium, and the list of performers was bananas. It was Madonna and the Beastie Boys, and Genesis and Metallica and the Pussycat Dolls. There were so many artists. And we just assumed that we would be at the bottom of the bill because I imagine, like at most festivals, that the lineup was based on popularity. But when we arrived and saw the schedule, it had us going on after everyone and just before Madonna. It turned out that a lot of these bands had other festivals they had to get to that night. The summer festival season in Europe is crazy, so every weekend is a different country and every country has a different festival. But anyway, I was terrified. And I remember before going on, my manager John Silva pulled me aside and said, "I just need for you to do one thing for me. I just need for you to be better than Metallica." I said that's not going to happen. But we decided since we had only 20 minutes on stage that we would do what Queen did at Live Aid, which was basically play 5 of our most recognizable songs that everyone could sing along to. And as we walked on stage, the sun was just going down, so the lights had just started coming up. And we basically did an abbreviated version of a greatest hits set list. So it was My Hero, and it was Everlong, and it was, Learn to Fly. Just the big singles. And in the middle of the set, I jokingly announced to the audience that we would never be back to play Wembley multiple nights. I was kidding. At that point, we had never even headlined a stadium. So about a year later, when my manager asked if we wanted to do it, of course we had to pull out all the stops. So we designed this stage in the round. Literally drew a picture of the stage on a napkin. It's so Spinal Tap, but it's true. It was just a crude drawing that ended up becoming the blueprint of that show. And then someone asked us if we wanted to have some special guests. So being a Led Zeppelin freak, I've got Zeppelin tattoos. I thought, well, we've got to call John Paul Jones. We had wound up performing The Pretender with him that year at the Grammys, and we made friends, so I figured this is the most momentous occasion of my entire life. Why not call the band that changed it all for me? So I got on the phone with Jimmy Page, and he basically said, well, what do you want to do? And I was terrified to answer. I felt like I was walking in a dream, but I had to say something. So I said, how about rock and roll? So he said, yeah, what else? I said, how about Ramble On? He said, great, see you at rehearsals. It was that easy. I couldn't believe it. It's kind of a blur to be honest. I know it's on Palladia or whatever, but I remember the rehearsals the day before when we were sound checking at the stadium. I was so nervous and hungover actually, and when they showed up, I couldn't believe that finally the moment I had been waiting for. To sit on a drum stool, look to my left and see Jimmy Page, look to my right and see John Paul Jones, was actually happening. Just being 8 feet away from Jimmy Page as he played this classic song and shredded these classic leads is just so hard to explain. It's almost as if I had fallen into a Led Zeppelin movie or something. It didn't even feel real. Their importance to me is hard to explain because I didn't take lessons. I don't understand conventional theory, I can't read music. But listening to those albums taught me so much. It kind of taught me how to learn, so in a way, I almost saw them as more than human, which of course they're not. They're wonderful, generous people that walk the earth as we do, but to me, they just meant so much more that I almost didn't want to impose any sort of personal relationship on them. Although years later, I ended up playing in a band with John Paul Jones and Josh Homme for a while called them Crooked Vultures, which was amazing because then I did become close friends with John. But every once in a while, I'll see a clip of that Wembley show, and I'll remember how I felt running up to that stage. Having 60 or 70,000 people singing Everlong, it was magical. I'm looking out at my mother, my wife, my daughter, my whole family just thinking, this wasn't supposed to happen. This band was never supposed to do this. And I'm so grateful for all the other things in my life, but I'd hate to feel like this was just another show. It wasn't, and it never will be for me. There are some things in life that stay with you forever, and yeah, that was one. End quote. As Dave Grohl mentioned in the quote, he, John Paul Jones, and Josh Homme formed a band called them Crooked Vultures. They debuted this band in 2009, remaining active until the following year, 2010. The band is currently on hiatus. Their debut single, New Fang, won the Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance. And in 2012, the Foos performed another cover of Zepp's Rock and Roll as part of a ceremony at the Kennedy Center honoring Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones all in attendance. Now, John Bonham was not just a major influence for Dave Grohl, but for many, many drummers. John Bonham is widely considered one of the best rock drummers ever, arguably the greatest rock drummer of all time. Like so many other iconic rock stars, however, John Bonham's life was unfortunately cut short. John Bonham died at the age of 32 on September 25, 1980. On September 24th, Led Zeppelin assistant Rex King picked up John Bonham and brought him over to a studio where the band was rehearsing. The rehearsals were for their upcoming North American tour. Throughout that day, John Bonham drank heavily. After rehearsal that day, the band went over to Jimmy Page's house in Windsor, about 45 minutes west of London. On September 25th, after midnight, John Bonham fell asleep at Jimmy Page's house and never woke up again. He was pronounced dead later that day. The inquest into John Bonham's death revealed that within a period of 24 hours, John Bonham had consumed approximately 1 to 1.4 liters of 40% alcohol by volume vodka, which is roughly 40 shots. John Bonham subsequently vomited and choked in his sleep. In a statement released by the band on December 4, 1980, Led Zeppelin announced that they would not be replacing John Bonham and had chosen instead to end the band out of respect for their friend. Quote, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep respect we have for his family, together with the sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager, have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." End quote. The unexpected death of John Bonham ended the Zeppelin story prematurely. What may have happened with the band should Bonham have lived, we will never fully know. With that said, during my interview with Led Zeppelin recording engineer Stuart Epps, I asked him what he thought would have happened if John Bonham hadn't died. This is what he had to say. If you want to see my full Led Zeppelin interview with Stuart Epps, the link is available below. So, this is a hypothetical question, but from what you may know, if Bonham hadn't died, do you know if Zeppelin would have continued on for much longer, or would they have come to an end inevitably anyways at some point in the near future?
Well, that's a good question. I would say yes. Personally, I would say they'd have just gone on, because had Bonham not died, there would have been another album, and then they would have wanted to tour that, I'm sure. As it turns out, he did die. So it's hypothetical. And the fact is that they then had to find their own way in the music business, Not that they had to. They're all billionaires, but obviously they would want to. And so Robert found his own, had to find a different career away from Zeppelin. And I'm sure he's very happy that that's what happened, because I think he was getting fed up with screaming his socks off. I'll say that in case there's any children listening. So, I think he was getting a bit fed up with that anyway. And because, it was a heavy rock band, it was blasting, and it was good when they were youngsters, but it might be something that you grow out of, Of course, they could have changed, I suppose, they could have changed the format a little bit. But, your question really was, would they have continued? And I think they would have continued. They would definitely have done another album, and maybe they'd have done another 2 albums, because they love to do that. They love to get together and they like to play together. And then, that's also why they would have probably carried on doing gigs. And also there's phenomenal money involved. Hundreds of millions, let's face it. That's why the Stones do it, no matter how rich they are. And also they have fun and they enjoy it, hopefully,
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So, we were talking a little bit earlier that if Zeppelin hadn't, obviously if Bonham hadn't passed, that there would likely have been another record and you would have been involved with that to some degree or another. Do you know if there were any demos that the band had prepared, or if there was any unreleased material the band was writing with, or was there nothing ready for a new album yet from what you may know?
There's no more unreleased material to be heard. Mm-hmm. He would have found it, because Jimmy doesn't mess around. He's very much still dedicated to the history of Zeppelin, and if there was something else around, he would have put it out.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if there were any like the wheels were turning on starting to write new material for another record post?
No, I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. See, the thing is that we're only talking. I've only met Jimmy a couple of times when Bonham died. So, of course, I met him. Yeah, we worked together for 5 years after that. If there was any more material or if they were working together, I don't really think so, because I think that if there would have been, if they'd have rehearsed something or anything, then it would have come out by now. They're probably see, the thing is, they were about to go on tour anyway. So, and I don't think they'd been on tour for a long time, this European tour. So probably that would have been them getting together to maybe do all sorts of things. And they were rehearsing only up the road in Bray, near where I am. So I kept going there in hopes to meet Jimmy, but every time I arrived, they either just left or they hadn't arrived yet. And but anyway, not too long after this, before the tour, Bonham was found dead in Jimmy's house in Windsor, and so that was a big blow, really, because I was, it was a big blow. I mean, whether I was getting ready to do the next Zeppelin album, kind of neither here nor there, because this was a terrible thing to happen to them. So it was a bit shocking. Basically, what took place then was us starting to work on this tribute album, which was really a tribute to Bonham. Starting off with this drum track, Bonzo's Montreux, crazy 24-track tape of Bonzo's Montreux, which was basically all drums. And I always say it was like being thrown in the deep end, really, because it could have just been a rock track, but it was quite peculiar being all drums. I mean, it was magnificent, really, but I think it was quite long. Then we had to edit it, and editing it wasn't easy. But it was, that was the first track we worked on. And then the other tracks that were from that Zeppelin album were from, that made up the Zeppelin album, Coda, where there was a couple from that were left over from In Through the Outdoor. I mean, I haven't got that album in front of me, but I think Wearing and Tearing, there was another one. Then there was a track called I Can't Quit You, which actually was, Jimmy didn't want it to be known, it's going to be known now, isn't it? But Jimmy didn't want it to be known that it was a live track. He wanted it to be known that it was some sort of recording, so I had to take all the audience off. But basically it was Led Zeppelin, I think, at the Albert Hall. But it was a great track. I Can't Quit You is a really good track. And what else we did? There was Poor Tom. And for that one, I remember Robert Plant coming in. That was the first time I met Robert. And that was nice, because, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't a huge Zeppelin fan. The most I got into Zeppelin was actually when Elton John bought his first giant stereo system for his mansion. He had these massive 4 speakers in a lounge, a huge lounge. And we had Zeppelin 2, which we used to whack up to test out his stereo. And actually, my favorite album was In Through the Outdoor, without a doubt.
Oh, cool.
I thought that was a great album. But so also I think at that time, pretty sure John Paul Jones popped in, because I seem to remember playing something, and he said, "Can you turn that down? And what do you think I am?" And I thought, well, I thought you were the bass player in one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So I thought, chances are you like loud music. You would go, turn it down.
So, I mean, prior to John Bonham's passing, were you thinking about how you'd approach working on the next Zeppelin record?
Oh, yeah, I was thinking about how I would do it. I mean, it's awful to talk about it now, because, I mean, I would have loved it. Would have been absolutely brilliant to have done that. But I suppose the Booby Prize, which wasn't a bad one, though, was when I got to work with Jimmy and Paul Rodgers with The Firm. Yeah. Because that was, in some ways you could say it was maybe even better than maybe what the Zeppelin would have been, because you've definitely got one of the best singers on the planet with Paul Rodgers. We had Chris Slade on drums, who's totally amazing, and Tony can't remember his surname, on bass. Simon Kirk, who was the drummer with Bad Company, who's a great drummer. Well, and Free, wasn't he? He was a drummer in Free as well. So I think he thought, because they were signed to Swan Song, which is Zeppelin's record company, I think maybe Simon thought he must be in for that job, to take over. And he would have been amazing, totally brilliant, without a doubt. But I think, the mark of Jimmy, if you like, and Robert and John Paul Jones is that they felt that Zeppelin was four people. Sorry.
That's
and,
okay.
And without Bonham, it wasn't there. They didn't want to carry on that band. That's the thing, which I think is that's pretty good of them, really. Not like this. Well, I mean, I shouldn't sort of badmouth, but I mean, the Stones. Charlie Watts died. Right, getting another drummer. Off we go. But I think Zeppelin were more like Bonham's. I don't say that Charlie Watts's contribution was any less than Bonham's, but I don't know. I think they were a closer unit, like definitely Bonham and Jimmy and Bonham and Robert, they were just so tight and close that they couldn't imagine going out without him. The thing with Bonham was his feel, his that's what made them so heavy, really, because they did everything, it was fairly slow, and slow tempos. But what makes it heavy is their timing and the sound and giving it plenty of space. That's when we were talking about sound, and I was, thinking about the mill for John Bonham's drum sound. It's possible to do that, but you need the space. I don't mean physical space. I mean you need the space in the sound. So if the drummer's playing at 100 million miles an hour and he's hitting the cymbals all over the place and the hi-hats all over the place, there's nowhere for that sound to go, whereas it's stumps, bah, boom, dum, bah. You can have a nice big rock sound, which is what they used to get. And the thing is, that's what I was going to say, is that Zeppelin didn't always work in giant rooms, like Abbey Road or something. That was the other great thing about Jimmy as a producer, is that no matter what studio they went to, he'd make sure he got a Zeppelin drum sound or a Zeppelin sound, which was generally a big roomy sound. And I know they worked at the ABBA studios, and Jimmy used to say they'd put a microphone in a cupboard or down the hall or something like that, inventing ways of getting that sound, which wouldn't just be using a big room, And anyway, I recorded, I mixed John Bonham's drums, so I know what the drum sound is like. And the bass drum was enormous sounding. It sounded like one of those you get in a fair, with the beaters. Whereas, the rock drummer normally takes the front skin off and puts a load of cushions inside. This sounded like it definitely had the front skin on. And it's just enormous. But, and then the snare sound as well, he's not bashing it away. He's probably got quite a light touch in a way. And anyway, he was a remarkable drummer, like Charlie Watts in a way. He was sort of more like a jazz drummer, or Ringo Starr. Jazz would have been part of his upbringing, not just straight ahead rock. So he was very bloody good, basically.
So, I mean, what did you think? I mean, I know you didn't get to work physically with him, but having been like intimately involved in mixing his tracks on Coda, what did you think of him as a drummer in particular? Like, what was it about John Bonham that people say he's the greatest of all time?
First of all, his sound, like I say, it was enormous. And listening to the individual multi-tracks, when I lifted up the bass drum, I thought, blimey, it does say bass drum on it, but that's not a bass drum that I've normally heard. It was like one of them fairground things, boom, 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 it was enormous. And what you had to do with that sound, you had to compress it quite a lot so that you still got the attack, but you had to work on it because it had so many frequencies anyway. It was obviously a very deep and sounds like a very large bass drum, that's for sure. It wasn't a tiny little bass drum. I didn't ask Jimmy. I didn't say, so how big was this bass? I just got on with it. And also you could hear that there were microphones above, like above the, picking up the snare, picking up the tom-toms. The main word is feel, F-E-E-L. That's the main word that you would use to describe what separates John Bonham from a lot of other drummers is his feel. And I think that even hearing him playing on his own, he's got a great feel. And I still love listening to Bonzo's Montreux and talking about it, whereas it's just drums. So that's just him. And he's not playing to a click. Yeah, that's what separates him out from other drummers. There was something else I was going to say. I was going to say that also within Zeppelin, and also because they're not playing to a metronomic click, they're making their own feel. And when you get a great rhythm guitarist like Jimmy playing with a great drummer like Bonham, they're setting up a unique feel that can't be replicated by machines or anything like that, really. It's very individualistic and separated Zeppelin out from other bands. Yeah, I mean, there's some great other drummers. Phil Collins is a great drummer. Charlie Watts is, a great drummer. Zach Starkey, absolutely brilliant drummer. But I suppose, when someone dies, however terrible it is, they get frozen in time, don't they?
Yep.
And the thing is that when we did the Coda album, this was a tribute to John, wasn't it? So we were living John Bonham, every day when putting his drums together. And I was very aware that, of course, the poor guy died, but this is great. What we're doing is this tribute. And in fact, there's a little while ago that an absolutely brilliant drummer who comes close to John Bonham, who's Zach Starkey. I don't know if you know,
yeah, of course,
who he is, but anyway, he's a brilliant guy, brilliant drummer. And he rang me up, or he got in touch with me, and that was mainly because he was a total Bonham fanatic. And when he heard that I did the Bonzo's Montreux, he had to meet me, he wanted to work with me and all this thing, because it was great to be doing that. And so we were living Bonham every day, really.
One thing I wanted to ask you is, obviously Jimmy Page is known as being one of the greatest guitarists ever, rightfully so. He's also one of the greatest producers, but people often kind of overlook that to a certain extent. How would you compare, from your experience with Jimmy, I know you've worked with him as a guitarist. Have you also worked with him producing-wise, like together?
Of course.
Yeah.
I have, yeah.
How would you compare his approach producing and recording guitars?
Yeah, good question. So, and I do talk about that because... Jimmy, very eccentric guy, not always easy to understand when I was working with him for one reason or another. But when we were doing the very first project that we did, as I say, was the putting together the Coda album. And all right, so there wasn't one interesting thing was that I knew that Jimmy Page was the producer of all these Zeppelin albums. So I suppose I was waiting to be told what to do, or I do this, now we do this, then we do that, now you do this. He didn't do that. But even when we were doing the Bonzo's ridiculous drum thing, he didn't tell me what drum sound he wanted or what reverbs to use. The thing is that when Jimmy came to the mill, he brought a load of his equipment with him, because Jimmy, which also people don't know, is he's an incredibly he's really into equipment. He's really into technology, the whole sound technology. He had a desk at his previous house, which was one of the first fully automated desks. He had all these incredible sort of computer ideas and machines that would be running delays. He had tons of rack equipment to do with reverbs and not reverbs, but delays that he used to use on Robert Plant's voice. So he was very, very much into technology. So I sort of assumed he was going to tell me what to do here, but he didn't. He just sat back and kind of, I got the feeling that if I was doing something wrong, he'd have said, "Oh no, do this." And but he very much let me get on with it. When it came to more of his ideas as a producer, I would say that was when we were doing the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, because he had some great ideas, backwards pianos, and he was much more, it was the producer side of him that came out much more during that project. He was really putting together singers. He had plenty of ideas, that's for sure. I think he's absolutely great producer. Very, very good to work with in the studio. Good atmosphere. Not telling people what to do. Hopefully, just putting together the right bunch of people, like he did with Zeppelin, really. Mm-hmm. And that's a good way of doing it. put the right bunch of people together, and then you don't have to tell them to do anything, do you? Because you know that they're going to do the job the way you want it, you know. So I think that's how Jimmy goes about stuff, really. Because let's face it, he was in the music business and working in studios from such a young age. Mm-hmm. And not everyone knows that either. So as a top session guy, you know, going around the studios, doing all the middle of the road stuff, God knows some of the things he might have done. He probably did adverts and all sorts of stuff. Apart from, as we know, playing with the Kinks and playing on some big pop records. So he was very, very knowledgeable about the studio. There wasn't much he didn't know about it. You know, he might know what he wanted to play, and that wasn't always easy, but he definitely didn't have a problem with, I want to do this idea, so we're doing that, you know. And actually those things are easier to sort of have happen, you know. But so definitely switched on producer, no doubt about it, yeah.
So when you're recording him now you're in producer engineer mode, you're recording him, are there any particular mics he prefers having his guitars recorded with? Like, what is his approach technically in the studio?
Yes. Very good question. I'd forgotten that. So I've got a very good answer for that, because people will want to know this, because this is different. So what he would do is he'd if we were doing a solo, say, he'd do a few solos like most people would. Like, you know, he'd do one solo, do it again. Then what he'd do is he'd tell me to put all 3 solos up, or all 4 solos up. And I think, blimey, that's different. So he'd play them all. And then what he would do is he'd design a solo. He'd design a solo made up of the 3 or 4 or 5 solos. And sometimes that was hard to follow. And sometimes I'd think to ask him a lot of questions, but then I found it was better not to ask questions, just to try and do what he's saying, and it'll all turn out hopefully all right in the end. So it might, you know, because I've done that. I've done many guitarists where you choose bits of their solos, but it was sometimes when someone else is trying to tell you what to do, it's not quite so easy. But basically, he designed the solo in that way. So there'd be 2 notes from that one note from that one. There might even be a part where there were 2 solos playing at the same time. That's what I mean. It was quite complicated and hard to follow. And there'd probably be times when I was thinking, this is going to be awful. You know, this isn't going to work. But then we finish it, we play it back, and I think, bloody hell, that's bloody good. That's a bloody good solo. And actually, when I listen now to Zeppelin tracks, and I hear a solo, I can hear sort of how it's been made up, you know, that it wasn't always a live solo. That's a producer, you know, that's a producer guitarist producing his own guitar solos. Also, he used to use, I don't know about mics, that was pretty much left to me, but that's also another good question, because I'm remembering back now. And the whole time I worked with Jimmy, we used an AC30 dialed up to number 12, I would say. It was definitely more than 10. And it was an AC30, and it was a particularly great one, and it would be definitely almost flat out. And then he very rarely used the Les Paul in the studio, if ever. It would be the Fender Telecaster. And that combination was a massive sound. He'd also use his string bender, Fender string bender, a lot, which that might have been a Telecaster, I'm not quite sure. You know, do you know the string bender guitar? Yeah. So actually, when, you know, and if you don't know about that guitar, that's actually a bit of a, you know, it gives his solos a lot of personality, because you hear all this bendy stuff, which you imagine he might have done with his finger, but he does it with the, it's kind of like a country. Normally it would be for country sounds, I guess, but with it wound up to 10, you know, it worked for rock, absolutely. But so sound-wise, yeah, I don't know what mic, I probably was sticking 87, I'm sure, on his AC30. And it was a blasting sound. Yeah, it's a great sound. And actually, I'm going to say it as well, because I often say this, but I haven't said it for a long time, is that my favorite thing that Jimmy would do is his rhythm playing. You know, he got this phenomenal way of of like hitting the chord right at the last millisecond, on the downbeat, so that it's going, and it just gives it more power that way. It's not like in front of the beat or way behind it. It's just as it's coming up. And when he was playing because I never got to work with him with John Bonham, but when I put Dave Mattox, I don't know if you know the drummer Dave Mattox, but brilliant drummer, and him and Jimmy, because Jimmy seems to work off of the drums, not the bass, or not. There's not many other people in Led Zeppelin, was there? But or the vocal, it was definitely him and Bonham, So they set up this great rhythm and drums, and I watched Jimmy doing that with Dave Mattox, and it was great, because he is a great rhythm player. That's one of the things that maybe even people don't realize, But for me in the studio, his rhythm playing was very, very good.
When you were working with Jimmy Page, is there anything that he ever did in the studio that really surprised you? Like, wow, that's an interesting way of approaching this, or I never thought a guitarist would do that. Like, was there any one thing that stuck out to you?
Everything surprised me, because I'd never worked with anyone like that. I've got a very good answer for that.
Okay.
Perfect answer. Right. So we're sitting there, we're doing Death Wish 2, and we're using this guitar synth. I mean, that was surprising. And then, of course, one guitar synth wasn't enough. So he had like the guy at Roland bring down two of these pedal boards, and basically the guitar synth, you could make it do all sorts of weird stuff, like going up and down, like swooping up the note and swooping down, and Jimmy would be tapping away on all these things, and then he had another one brought in, so it was surprising he did stand up through all that and not fall over. But then we were in there one day, and someone said, his guitar tech suddenly said, "What about the theremin on this?" And I'd never heard of a theremin. And I'm thinking, what the hell is a theremin? So then suddenly someone comes in with this big cardboard box with aerials sticking out of it. And I'm sure there was like straw coming out of it as well. And I thought they were having a joke on me. I thought this was for my benefit. And they start setting this thing up. And I'm just thinking, I think I've seen everything now. This is... what the hell is this? Anyway, so they set up this, people who know the theremin, they set up this aerial, and then it's connected to an Echoplex tape, and then he's doing all that business with the all that business. And I'd never heard of a theremin. I mean, I've checked it out, I checked it out after that and found out it's a 19th century instrument, and, one of the earliest electronic instruments. Talk about surprising. Yeah, that was, but you see, that's the thing. I mean, Jimmy was full of surprises, he's that sort of a guy, and that's the way he sort of conducted himself. I mean, the whole fact he put, Zeppelin was a surprise, wasn't it? If you were around, you're too young. but when Zeppelin arrived, it was like, what is that? It was like, I mean, all right, there were a lot of bands around at the time that were sort of similar, but they were a phenomenon without a doubt, I mean, they were like brilliant musicians, not many of them. I mean, you're talking about a three-piece, really. You're talking about bass, drums, and guitar, one bass, and drums, making this amazing sound, great musicians. And they also followed their own way, didn't they? Didn't put out singles. They wouldn't do this, we don't do that, we don't do this. They're very much like they designed themselves. So and that's the background that Jimmy came from. And like you say, he's considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time. And that's not bad. And actually, what I always say now, I often say, and I think very lucky that this happened this way, because I work with Led Zeppelin, and I'm very proud of that, is because a lot of young bands, you say to them, and they could be 15 or 16 or 18, and you say, who's your favorite band? They say Led Zeppelin. I said, but Led Zeppelin disbanded 40 years ago, isn't there anything a little bit later on, and they go, no, Led Zeppelin, that was it, and that's Led Zeppelin. Unfortunately, then you listen to their music and it's nothing like Led Zeppelin, because I'm always looking out for another Led Zeppelin.
When you're working with Jimmy in studio on tape, how many takes do you guys do typically? And like, do you often double the takes afterwards? Like, what was that aspect of it like?
It's two different things, really. So, first of all, you said, how many takes would you do?
Yeah.
Well, if I was working with Gus, it could be hundreds. Gus being Elton John's producer, used to do many, many takes with the rhythm section in the studio. We might do 20 different takes of the same song. And then what he would do is cut between them, cut all the best takes together, even only to make up a 4-minute track song. So, but when you're talking about, that's the difference between some pop productions and a rock band, because a rock band would tend to not want to do that. A rock band like Jimmy, like with Zeppelin, I'm sure, or with The Firm, is that you go out there and you do a great take and you go, that's the one. Basically, they'd go out there and they'd get a good groove, and then they go, how was that? And I'd go, bloody brilliant, come in and hear it. And they go, you're right, and that's it. And as I say, even to the extent when you're talking about double track vocals, Paul Rodgers didn't even want to do the song again. He didn't want to sing the song again, let alone double track it. That's it. It's finished. So basically what you're talking about there is a band trying to reproduce what they might do live on stage in the studio. And that's quite a different thing to the way pop records are made now, or even rock records are made now, where you're layering and layering and layering, you know, and you're using Pro Tools and you're copying and pasting and all this sort of stuff. It's very, very different. And basically, yeah, you can end up with amazing results, absolutely. And some might say you end up with better results. But then if you go back to some of the 70s music and 80s music, which wasn't done that way, and you go, wow, that's better, you know. And then if you describe how it was recorded, which was just 4 or 5 people playing live in the studio and an engineer recording it, you go, wow, they're geniuses, you know, compared to today. Unfortunately, without getting too depressed about it, you know, musicians today, I mean, very difficult. It's not often you come across amazing drummers like John Bonham, incredible singers like Paul Rodgers, and amazing producer, guitarist like Jimmy Page. You talk about Jimmy Page, who was playing guitar when he was about 8, you know, and only wanted to be a great guitarist, you know, not being the biggest band in the world. He probably had no idea about that. He just wanted to be a great guitarist and be playing live, you know. And so he made it his thing to be that person. And the same with Paul Rodgers as far as singing was concerned. Not to be the greatest songwriter in the world, not to be in the biggest band. He just wanted to be able to sing the best. And that's what I say to a lot of youngsters, and hopefully some of that are watching, is that, you know, try not to be everything. And it's not actually very possible to be everything in music, you know, but try and be the best at even just one thing is sometimes definitely good enough. That's unfortunately what a lot of youngsters, they want to be the singer, the guitarist, the bass player, the producer, the engineer, the writer, the this, that, and the other, you know. Unfortunately, not so many records are done these days in teams of people, and the best teams of people being bands. That's where the best music was made, within, you know, I mean, with a lot of heartache a lot of the time, a lot of screaming and shouting and pulling and pushing and this, that, and the other, but out of it came some great music.